What are some, another question we got, what are some things, guys, you look for in a Christian woman? Like, what is that godly woman? And the opposite, girls, what are you looking for in a godly man or a Christian man to date?
I'll answer it. He kind of asked us in the question, like, what do you look for in a godly woman? That's like the first thing, that she is a Christian and like she's following the Lord. Like Jesus is the Lord of her life, and she like seeks to grow in a relationship with Him. Even like beyond that, I would say like you definitely want her to be like living in community. Like it's been brought up so much, but like that's one of the first things I would like try to figure out if I was interested in someone. Like, is she surrounded by girls who are going to point her to the Lord? We're going to ask her tough questions. We're going to basically they would hold you accountable to go on dates. They would say like, what did he do? And they would make sure you're good enough to date her. That's what you want to look for in a girl. But then so those are kind of like non-negotiable for me. Beyond that, like there's some like preferences. Like I'm obviously like into music, so it'd be cool if she was into music too. But there's also things you need to hold with maybe like a slightly more open hand. And you gotta realize like things like I like to rock climb, but like it's maybe unrealistic to like just decide whether a date's by whether she rock climbs or not, because chances are more than 5 years after like college, you won't be. You might be like having a family, or might be in a situation where just rock climbing is not reasonable. So you just need to like understand like what's something to look for that's worth holding close to, and what's something to keep more open.
I'll add something. I think it's really important to look for someone with humility and someone who's willing to admit when they're wrong. That's something that I just feel like is non-negotiable and has been true of Mark in our relationship. And so if we have conflict, there's not this defensiveness that he's not willing to admit when he's wrong, and I really appreciate that. And then the whole idea of leading, because he's led me before we had kids, and now he's leading our family with 4 kids, and so it's just important that that quality of taking the initiative with us and walking with Jesus closely on his own, not just someone who says they're a Christian and knows they're going to heaven, but somebody who is actively pursuing a relationship with Jesus constantly, because that allows me to trust Mark, because I know as he is trusting Jesus with me and with our kids, it gives me great faith in him to lead us, because I know that's where his faith is.
Thanks, honey. That's nice that you say that. If I was a girl, but I'm not, and I was looking for a guy, let me just be really candid with you. This is a sad thing for me, because being as old as I am, I know a lot of students that are sitting where you have sat years ago. And let me tell you, the ones that have gotten married and divorced, women, let me tell you why, okay? If I was a woman, these 2 characteristics were absent in at least a handful of guys' lives. All right? So if you're dating someone, or think about dating someone, they don't have this in their lives, outside of obviously they love the Lord and they want to lead, but there's 2 other significant characteristics. If they were not in their life in dating, they're not going to be there in marriage, and it's a surefire recipe for disaster. Number 1, teachable. So, you're dating a guy and you point something out to him that's wrong. How does he respond? Oh, do you know, is he like really upset about that? Because if you get married, you're going to know him better than anyone. And you're the one who's going to have graciously and lovingly have an opportunity to communicate the truth and love to your husband. And how does he respond to that? The second one is does he have men in his life that will tell him what he needs to hear? Here's the deal. If I start treating my wife really badly and just start becoming a jerk, I mean, I have jerk potential, all guys do. But if I really start becoming a jerk and treating her poorly and the kids poorly, you know what would happen? I would have a number of men at my doorstep in my face saying, what are you doing? Because I invite people into my life. Because I know that I cannot do this thing alone. It's beyond me. And there's too many traps everywhere. And so, I heard someone say this year, and this really ticks me off, so I'm going to address this issue. Okay? Someone said, Crusade, all they want, why are they so concerned, not like we all are concerned with this, why are they so about like dating relationships being open and other people knowing what's going on in your dating relationship? Let me tell you why, okay? Let's say you don't have that. Let's say that you're just you and your little honey living your own little life, okay? And this guy is a good-looking guy, handsome, everything you ever wanted. 10 years later, he's in the marketplace. You're home with 3 kids. He sees this really attractive woman at the workplace. How's it going now? You see, he needs a man in his life now to deal with these issues, right? To get practice in saying, you know what? I'm struggling with this, this, and this. I need your help. So if he's not able to do it now in community, what makes you think that 10 years from now, where statistically speaking, your marriage has a 50% chance it's going to fail? He needs men in his life. So I'm glad that people think, well, they're just all about, and for good reason. I could spend the next several hours telling you story after story of brokenness because the guy was unteachable and he had no one in his life. You see, those are 2 characteristics that if I was a girl, I would say, that's going to be top of the list outside of walking with Jesus and those other things. So that was therapeutic. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest. If you're really upset about that, come and talk to me. I'd love to talk to you more about that.
All right, so now that we talked about Mark, you're like rip the microphone out of my hand over here. All right, so we talked about what's important to look for in the other person. So then you're dating. Okay, how do you get to the point where, like, this is a lot of juniors and seniors ask this. So you get to the point where you're like, okay, is this the right person I want to marry? And then also for juniors and seniors, like, at what point is it healthy and necessary for dating couples to like take each other into an account when they're like deciding futures and stuff after college? So.
To address the first part of that, for juniors and seniors, once it's okay to start discussing about the future, because realistically, those questions are going to come up. But for us, we started dating beginning of senior year, probably through senior year. So right in the beginning of our relationship, those questions started coming up of like, what are you doing next year? But for us, we really started just talking more about individually what we're doing and kind of processing that together. But at the same time, since we were still early in our relationship, we were just processing that individually and kind of starting to make our own decisions and process where do you want to be in a few years? Where can I see myself? Oh, do these things start to match up a little bit? Like, oh, you can see yourself overseas. I can see myself overseas. Okay, start to like pair up a little bit, but we never really started making plans together at all. Yeah. What was the second question? I forget.
We're just like, how do you get to the point where you know that that's the right person? And then dating, like you want to marry them, but then also, so then like when you
There's a halo over their head. That's when you know you're supposed to marry them.
So there's 3 M's that Mark Brown likes to talk about. They're called master, mission, and mate. And I think really the question is, when you're thinking about the future, is Jesus Christ, as you're making that decision, is he the Lord of your life at that given point in time? Are you yielded to him and willing with an open hand, being like, I like this person, I can see this going to marriage, but I want to give that to the Lordship of God? Am I willing to start there? And then be thinking about, as you uniquely, how God uniquely created you, and what passions he's put in your heart, and what you see him leading you towards into your future. And as you're doing that, it's kind of like looking around really and seeing who's around you and just being willing to be honest with yourself. Is like, is this person running with me towards this mission that the Lord has called me to? And that might be really hard in a lot of ways. And that's what I think Mark was alluding to. It's like, if you're doing what God created you to do, you're in a sweet spot every time, and he's going to provide for you the perfect provision for you as a wife or a husband within that. I think that's kind of like the more important question as you start making those decisions. And as you see that, I think it's, if you start there, it makes the timing of like, how do I include this person in my future plans a lot more easier, because you know where you're going. And you're making the end goal to glorify God and not to get married. And that's, I'll be honest, that's really, really hard. And the longer you go in life, that could probably end up being harder and harder. And I think that was a big one for me, that sometimes, I was going to go back to one of these other questions about what you look for. It's like, sometimes you just fear that there's not someone out there good enough. And I wouldn't date purely on potential. If you don't see things in that person that we're talking about now, I wouldn't date purely off of potential. Obviously, people are going to grow and whatnot. But for women in particular, it's like, well, I don't really know. He's okay, and he's really cute at least. And I just want to tell you guys that, like, I don't like to see women settle. It breaks my heart. You guys do deserve, if you feel like you're settling, you do deserve someone who honors you and wants you to feel respected, feel honored, feel cherished, feel pursued for the rest of your life. And I wouldn't date purely off of the potential that could occur if X, Y, or Z would happen.
The next question is, did any of you guys have close friends of the opposite sex while dating someone, or even into marriage? And what can that look like, and did that cause any problems or conflict?
I can talk. No, I did not. I do not. I don't have close guy friends that I would spend one-on-one time with, or friends that I would call and share my feelings with, or even what I'm learning in the Word, what God's shown me from in church or in my Bible reading. Like, there's just not any men in my life since I started dating Mark that I would have kept continuing to be close friends with. I think if you are dating, that's inappropriate. I think it's disrespectful to the person that you're dating, and it can lead to some really awkward interactions, I think, with the person you're dating, and also with that friend. Can deal with jealousy issues. There's a ton of stuff wrapped up in that, but I did not have close guy friends.
I think some of the heart behind that too is because when you're dating, you're looking for a future spouse and someone who you want to marry. And when you're married, like, the only friends who are going to be in my life who are women are going to be Alyssa and probably her friends who she has over. Those are probably going to be the only women who I really interact with on a whole. So I'm really not too worried about who are going to be my women friends in my life, because the fact is I'm only going to have one woman friend, and she's going to be my best friend, and that's a lot better. So it's really not going to worry about spending too much time with those other friends.
So you're not going to have any, like, women you're going to go scrapbooking with on the weekends or anything like that? That's good. All right, so if there's conflict in a relationship, what's it look like to healthily deal with that? Like, how have you guys dealt with conflict? Lots of conflict, apparently.
One of my favorite things about Joe is actually how he handles conflict. I think somebody else touched on it, maybe Diane. But without a doubt, whenever we do have conflict, and we do, because that just happens in marriage and dating, that's normal. And a lot of times I think people can tend to, when conflict starts to happen, kind of run away from it. But how you date also will determine, like, how your marriage goes, and the way that you, like, handle things. And so I think it's really, really good and really challenges you and grows your character to, like, work through conflict. And so one thing that I love about in our marriage is that whenever we have conflict, Joe's always the first one to come to me and try to work things out, whether I was the one that caused the conflict and was wrong or whether he was. And that's just one way that he, one example of the ways that he leads our relationship, our marriage, and just takes the initiative is by coming to me and trying to work things out with me and taking responsibility for any sin that he had within it. And then I always obviously ask for forgiveness too. But yeah, so that's one way we handle it.
No, I think really practically, like, we try to work on things before we go to sleep at night. I think just having the idea, the mindset that you're going towards a common goal, talking about like you're on the same team, you want to pursue the other person, practically saying specifically what you did wrong, how you, like, if you sense that, you know, if you've done something wrong, being humble enough to be like, I'm sorry I did, that was wrong, will you forgive me? You know, it's like, it sounds really easy, but like sometimes that's really hard to do. But like, can you be humble enough to do that? I think is really important, as well as like being willing to. I feel like going first, even if it's like even saying stuff like, hey, I feel like, you know, it's like, it seems like you're really, it felt like you're really unloving how you came back. It's like, how did that come off to you? You know, if you come off with something. As a guy, it's taken me a really long time. I had no females in my life, like no sisters or anything. So a lot of times it's like, I don't know what these emotions are. What's going on? I have no idea what I did. Like literally, you're angry. I don't know why. But and the temptation there is just be like, I'm right. Like, she's got issues. She would just like not do that. But so like, can I get to the point where I can say, hey, I feel like I'm experiencing that I did something that really upset you. I really would like to understand that. So that's something I can grow in and understand you better and grow in depth of intimacy in that relationship.
Justin, that's a good reason you have a little sister. Just wanted to remind you of that. Sorry. But Joe, it just reminded me that you didn't get a chance to work on that, and Justin gets to with his little sister. One of the things that just made me think of some of the reason that we have conflict in our relationship are just expectations. So I would say just to be cautious about that unmet expectations tends to be a root, at least in my life. So I'll have maybe a thought in my mind that I've never verbalized to Mark, so it's an expectation, but he's clueless about it. Something as simple as there's laundry piled up on our bed and it needs to be folded, and I'm not home and maybe he is, so I come home and it's still unfolded. And so it was somewhere in my mind I created an expectation that he might fold the laundry, and sometimes he really does, so whatever. But sometimes...
So you're saying I'm supposed to read your mind?
Yes, that's what, sometimes I think that he should read my mind, and so then I get huffy or mad because the laundry's still unfolded, but I didn't speak out loud or communicate, honey, would you please fold the laundry? Because I think, okay, part of me thinks, it's obvious, if you fold the laundry, you gotta get into bed tonight. But that's not fair, so sometimes you just shove it off and wait till the next day, that's true. Anyway, I'm digging a hole with this example, but I think you understand the idea. Unmet expectations can be a problem.
We don't want Mama Brown to get huffy. All right, so let's say you're in a relationship and you get to the point where you're like, maybe this isn't the right person. How can a Christian couple handle a breakup well so it's healthy for both people involved? And also, to go off of that, like, so let's say you do break up, is it possible to go back to being friends? Or like if you're dating intentionally, pursuing a girl, and you're like, we're not going to become boyfriend/girlfriend, like how do you go back to, is it possible to go back to being friends like normal?
I think you should go for it.
How do you break up in a way that's going to be good and healthy for both people?
I think it's, even if you're the break-upper or break-up-e in the relationship, well, Allison is saying, she's reminded me of how I learned very poorly how to break up, how I called her Joe for an hour and a half, broke up with her in an empty parking lot, and then went home. Yeah, don't do that. That's really loving. On the 4th of July, and her family still goes, you remember 4th of July when Allison broke up with Joe? I'm like, we're married, covenant forever. I said I was sorry, get over it. I can't help it. I can't go back in time. If I could, I would. But I think one of the things that I lacked in that situation is realizing that I didn't take responsibility. I looked for an easy way out. And I think it's, whether you're the breakup-er or breakup-e, I think as a guy, it's your responsibility to lead that relationship well, put the other person's interests in mind. Ideally, it would be something that could be talked about. It would be something you talked about with other people prior to doing it. Ideally, you would go and make really wise decisions about your interactions afterwards, because it's going to be really tempting. I'm assuming if you're dating that person, you've texted, called, spent significant amounts of time with them over a lot, and not being, I feel like as a guy, it's really confusing, especially if you're the one breaking up with the person, to like text them. Another thing that I think I probably did poorly. It's really one of the saddest times in my life whenever that happened with support and stuff, and I was like calling Allison because she was the one that I was closest to. It's like, how fair is that to do to a woman that you just broke up with, emotionally do that? So it's like realizing that you have responsibility to continue to lead even after you break up, and allow them to have a place and a time to grieve, to move on, and not make emotional impulse decisions.
All right, we're going to finish up with one last question. And this last question, we kind of asked Allison ahead of time to prepare some stuff, but if anyone else on the panel wants to chime in after her, like, feel free. But the question is, can God redeem a physically impure relationship? Like, is breaking up the only solution? And also, like, what's that healing look like in the individual that has crossed those boundaries, that has went too far?
Yeah, so just as I was thinking about this question this week, and in light of the talk last week, it's like the reality is that the majority of everyone sitting in this room here has had some type of impure relationship, whether that's lust or having sex. And so we like realize that, and it's like I can really actually relate to that. And I actually had several impure relationships before Joe and I started dating, and I didn't always do things the right way. And I'd be lying to say that that hasn't affected me and hasn't sometimes continued to affect me. And so I think it's wise to know if you've been in an impure relationship or are in one now, it's going to be harder for you to maintain a pure relationship in the future, but it's definitely possible. And the Lord isn't ashamed of you, but rather really desires this for you. And I think that that was just a big lie that I believed when I first accepted Christ. And as I was processing this today with a friend, she actually brought this up, so I don't want to take credit for it, but we were talking about Rahab in the Bible, and it's like Rahab was a prostitute. She was completely taken advantage of, she was defiled, and she was just considered disgusting by everyone. But it's like, what did the Lord do to her? He redeemed her completely and made her white as snow. And so, as I was just thinking about that, a lie that I always believed was like, if you think like I've gone too far and it's like nobody's ever going to want me, or I don't even like deserve a godly husband or wife someday. It's like, think of Rahab and think of how she was redeemed and ended up being one of the most significant ways she was used was just by being the mother of Boaz, and ended up getting to be in the lineage of Jesus, which is like really cool. And I think shows Jesus' heart, God's heart, just towards our sin. It's like his heart is to redeem us. And I think that like one of the most significant ways I've just really tangibly experienced the Lord's faithful love in my life and just His really, really sweet grace is actually through my relationship with Joe, with my past. And so the day that we sat down during our engagement to talk about just past relationships was probably one of the most was one of the most painful days of my life. Just to share with him that I had had sex before. It's still painful now, obviously. This is how I still deal with it. Because sin just sucks. It's painful, and it's hard. But the really cool thing, despite that I'm crying, is that it's a testimony, even despite that in my life, it's a testimony of how much the Lord's done in my life and how much He's just transformed both of our lives and the grace and how much He's redeemed me. And so the cool thing is, like I was saying, that I've experienced grace in the most tangible way through Joe, is just how he unconditionally loved me despite the decisions I made. And he never held it against me. He never made me feel less precious because of it. And that's really how it should be, because we're all equal at the foot of the cross and we've all been forgiven the same amount. And I know, like, just specifically that there's girls in this room that I've shared my story with, and they've shared with me, and they've said that they've been in a relationship with a guy, and the guy's found out that they have, like, an impure past, and the guy's actually said, like, I don't want to date you. And, like, I just want you to know, like, whether it's a guy or a girl, like, the Lord has redeemed you, and, like, you deserve to be, like, with a godly man. And even just like Ryan said last week, like, the Lord does, like just completely wash you pure as snow, and, like, you're seen as forgiven in His sight, and, like, you can be pure on your wedding day. And so there's hope and there's redemption in that, and it's really powerful and really cool.